Hi guys, so in this video I'm going to show you how to make 1revs, and basically 1revs are originally were invented to extend the range of your cannon and make it shoot farther, and also like another purpose of them is like you can make it so your cannon stacks higher than it usually would by revving this stuff up before it stacks. But first I'm just going to tell you why it extends the range of the cannon when you add 1rev. And if you don't know, like, one way to get your cannon to shoot farther is to have more power. And the reason it shoots farther because of that is because the thing's going faster because you put more propulsion behind it, because you put more power. But another thing that determines how far your cannon shoots is basically how many game ticks of travel it has. So 1revs work on that, where they kind of allow you to extend how many game ticks it has to travel. They don't actually speed up how fast it moves through the air. They just make it so it can move through the air for longer. So on a normal cannon, the first thing that blows up after it's shot out is the hammer. So basically that means the hammer is limiting how far it can shoot. So you might think if you just delay the hammer, then it has more ticks to get there. It has more ticks to fly through the air, and it should go farther, and it will actually go farther if you just delay the hammer. But the problem with that is that the longer you delay the hammer, the more the shot dips down because of gravity. What happens is it just stacks too low, so if you delay it even one more tick, it'll stack a block below the patch. It'll stack to here, basically. It won't touch the patch and it won't break it, so you'll just never be able to pass it. So basically all that 1rev does is it allows you to delay your hammer past 3 redstone ticks, because before it stacks, the 1rev just revs the shot back up to the right height, or any height basically, to the height that you want it to stack at. So I'll just show you how to add it. It's very simple. So the one I'm going to be adding is first is 5-7. That's the name of the ratio, I guess. And all that means is that the 1rev TNT is 5 redstone ticks after the second power. 5 redstone ticks after the second power, and the hammer, instead of being 3, it goes to 7 redstone ticks after the second power. So to make it 7 redstone ticks after, I just need to add 4 redstone ticks to the hammer. So that's 4. And now if I fire, it's going to be 21, which is 4 after the second power. So after you delayed the hammer, you do also have to delay the sand, because you need to keep it so the sand goes after the hammer. And since I made the hammer a bunch later, I also need to make the sand later. If you don't do that, it just won't have the order of entities right to stack. So I'm going to check when the sand is opening, and it's like 19.5. So I'm just going to add 2 redstone ticks before the sand. It doesn't need to be 4 to match the hammer, because it just needs to be after the hammer. So that'll put it to 21.5, which is after the hammer on 21. So as you can see. So I haven't added the 1rev TNT yet, so it's not going to really work correctly, but I'm just going to show you. I'm just going to fire and show you that it like stacks low because the hammer is so delayed. So it stacks all the way down here. Okay, so I'm just going to add the 1rev TNT now, and the 1rev TNT has to go with the first power with the sand in the nuke compartment, and it's timed before the hammer. It's 5-7, right? So the 1rev's always before the hammer. Basically, I'm just gonna find a way to do it, and we can do it like this, which, because of how this is laid out. So you can see that this is 5 redstone ticks after the second power, and then 2 later, which makes it 7 after the second power. Then the hammer goes off, and this doesn't power the hammer, it just powers that one TNT. Okay, so I turned off the nuke, and if I just fire now, you'll see that it basically, well, right now it swings up, I guess, because of the number of hammer I have, but it stacks, first of all, it stacks at the right height. It's touching the patch, so this is the correct height, and that's with a 7 redstone tick hammer, so that means the 1rev's working and it's revving it up. So I have this block here because right now with exactly 300 hammer, it won't stack fully. So for a lot of 1rev ratios, you have to add a little bit more hammer. So I know for 5-7, you need 306 minimum. So now if I fire, you'll see that it you always want to see if it can stack all the way from the highest adjust to bedrock. So there you go. But the reason you need a little more hammer sometimes is just because when these two things get revved up, they might not end up super like as close together as they would on a normal cannon. They might have a slight little air gap between them, which means the hammer's farther away from the sand, so that means you need more hammer to move the sand the same amount. So if I fire now, I turn the nuke back on, and I'm pretty sure it won't nuke. Okay, yeah, so the reason why is because I delayed the sand. I have to delay the sand, and because of that, the order of entities is wrong. The nuke has to be after all the sand, and since I delayed it, it's not anymore, so I have to delay the nuke too. So I'm just going to delay it 2 redstone ticks like I did for the sand, and this thing too, which this is the second game ticks. And then we'll see if it works or not. So boom. Okay, so now it's back to nuking. Okay, so now I'm just going to explain like one little thing about 1rev, which might be hard to notice, but when you shoot like the two things at the wall like this, your 1rev's in here, it's with the first power, it's with the sand. Your 1rev's in here, and your 1rev blows up, and it revs up the hammer, but it does actually rev up the sand as well. And the reason why is because of order of entities. It's rendered earlier than any of the sand. So basically, because it's before the hammer, the 1rev's before the hammer, and the hammer is definitely before the sand, so the 1rev's before the sand. So because this is rendered before the sand, it ends up revving up the sand, even though it's kind of shot in the same block. But some people will say like it's because it falls at the wall first, or it like updates at the wall first. But basically what's happening is because when this one TNT's explosion is calculated, this one 1rev explosion is calculated, it's before any of these sand are calculated because it was rendered first, it was added to the list first. So in the game tick where this explodes, it still moves. It still moves in the game tick before it explodes, so it still has a little bit of movement, and since it was falling, it just falls a little more in the last game tick, and then it renders the explosion. And it renders the explosion below all these sand because these sand haven't been calculated. They haven't realized that they're also supposed to fall. And since they didn't, in theory, the explosion happens below the sand because it fell. So when these sand finally get calculated, they realized that they had this little bit of velocity from this 1rev that explode under them and before them. So it also revs up the sand. And I'll just tell you some 1rev ratios now, I guess. So some good ones, basically the best one I think for normal stacking height is the one I just did, which is 5.7. And then there's also 5.9, which is also good. It like can clip in the first game tick because of how late the hammer is, but 5.9 is good if you want a really late hammer and you want to separate them easily, like on a quick print or whatever, hammerless. But so those are good. You can just find whatever. You can just find 1rev ratios. And then barrel stack ones. So really the popular one is 2.53. This isn't really a 1rev because you haven't really delayed your hammer past 3. But I'll do that really quick. So put the hammer back on 3 and then put that there. And then basically I'll just show you 2.53, which is, this will put it on 2.5 basically. If you don't believe me, you can see 16.5, 17. And this will basically stack, this happens to also swing at 306, but this will basically stack at barrel height, 1 higher, and then there's the nuke. So, but yeah, and then another for barrel stacking is like 4.6, which, like, I guess I'll do. So I need to delay the hammer to 3, 1, 2, 3, and then put this. So this is now 4.6, I think. Well, 20, and then the 1rev's on 18. So this is 4.6, and then you can see it's also going to barrel height. Okay, so I'm just gonna tell you really quickly how much range 1revs add. So on 5.7 or 5.9, basically the first number, that's how many redstone ticks of travel it has. So now it has 5 redstone ticks to fly through the air. And on an original cannon, it only has 3, so it has 2 more. So it basically has 66% more, or 2/3 more range now. So like, if the original cannon went 100 chunks, now with the 1rev it would go 167 or 66. But really, it's not quite that much. It's probably like 163 or something, because not every next game tick. Every next game tick is a little less because there's simulated air resistance, so it does slow down a little bit. So that's pretty much it for 1revs. You might be thinking that a 5.7 1rev has more travel time than just 5 redstone ticks, because like, yes, the 1rev is 5 redstone ticks after the second power, but isn't it getting shot with the first power? So isn't it getting shot before the second power, and that means it has more time to travel? So it is true that the nothing will explode until 7 redstone ticks of distance out. Nothing will explode, including the 1rev, but basically only the first 5 redstone ticks of that range it'll stack in. So there's only 5 redstone ticks of usable range, and the reason why is basically like, both your hammer and your 1rev needs to hit the wall before the 1rev explodes for it to stack. So that means that the wall has to be close enough that the 1rev gets there and the hammer also gets there before the 1rev blows up. And since the 1rev does have 7 redstone ticks of travel, but it was shot 2 earlier than the hammer, so it already wasted 2 of those redstone ticks, so it only has 5 left for the hammer to also get there and be at the wall before it explodes. Because if the hammer's not there and the 1rev explodes, then the 1rev doesn't affect the hammer, so it's just lost and it won't stack. So yeah, that's why it doesn't have 7. But that's pretty much it for 1revs, and I'll see you later.